Okay, this is one of our first how-to videos. This is just going to depict how we do setting copper rivets. As you can see, we've got a couple pieces of leather glued together, and we have a few tools up here. First tool we have is one of the common ones, I guess, that you can pick up about at any leather supplier, which works pretty well as long as you modify it a little bit. So to take off the sharp edges, polish the peening surface for the rivet inside. And the other choice, which I like very well, I obtained from the Buckle Guy. And the Buckle Guy's copper rivet tools are very high quality stainless steel. All the edges have been smoothed internally here where the rivet will set. Nice and smooth operation there. Then the peening area here is got a high polish on the inside, and it's again nice and smooth to the touch. No sharp edges, high quality product. I enjoy using them very much. The third portion of the tool, it's got a dish shape in here that has been machined into the surface so that when you're finished, you can peen that over. I'll show that in the demonstration, to kind of bend the little sharp edges here that you see on the sharper edge here you see on the very outside circumference of the rivet. It kind of peens it over in this fashion so that it peens it up into the leather a little bit to make it so that it doesn't catch on the surface of the leather that you're leaving it on, depending on which side you're using as your finished side. I always use the finished side as being the cut side, the peened side. Anyway, I have these from the Buckle Guy in size 12, and again, same tool in size 14, which are the two common ones that I use frequently. My plan is later to purchase them in the number 9 size also, but I don't use a lot of number 9 rivets. So I just use this generalized cheap tool very carefully, especially after I've smoothed the edges a little bit to make them so they're not as sharp, because when I purchased it, it was very sharp. I used a very smooth file to alleviate the sharp edge a little bit around here, and I repolished the dome area, which is where the peening actually happens. So I high polished that and resurfaced the whole outside edge here. Okay, well, let's get started here. Anyway, when I punch my holes, if I have the room to facilitate using this type of punch, I like that very well. This is a nice punch. If you buy, you can buy good ones and you can buy bad ones. This one here happens to be a very nice one, very good indeed. As long as you keep your punches sharp, I always strop them when I get a chance if I notice that they're not cutting really good, and I always check to see the alignment is fine on the anvil to make sure that it cuts flat straight across. Sometimes, you have to adjust these via the screw and the locking mechanism to adjust them to get them so that they function and cut round. How I check my size for my hole that I'm making is I pick the size rivet that I'm going to use, and I gently insert the beveled tip of the rivet, which is the very point, as long as that fits in the hole of my punch just a little bit, that's what I'm looking for. To have a nice snug fit in the leather. That's very important. So you find your area in which you want to place your rivet. Usually I'd have measurements where I'm going to place my rivets. But for today, I just kind of am going to do it by eye. I kind of set my rivet where I would like to see it, and I kind of move it around a little bit. It gives me a little indentation on my leather where it's going to go, and I hit that right in the very center with my punch. Just like that. This has a pretty snug fit, and if you notice right here, this is what the peening does in the final stage. It can help take care of a little bit of that wobble that you see, or the not fitting snug. I usually will cut this hole in the backside with a custom knife that I made. I use this. If I want it to sit nice and flush, I'll take the point of this knife, because it's got a really fine point, and I will rotate this knife in the hole just slightly, enough to cut the leather to give it a little bevel. Just like that. There's a slight bevel, and that fits the bevel in the rivet. The bevel of the inside where it contacts the leather hole. Now when I push it down, it's about 95% level with the surface of the leather. You're not taking off very much, just an ever so slight amount, depending on what size rivet you're going to use, of course. Okay, now back onto our tutorial. Now we pick the size of keeper for our rivet, and if you notice and feel the rivet, I always use the side of the rivet towards the outside surface of the leather. I will make that, there's two sides to these keepers, which is basically a washer, a copper washer. If you turn it over and feel it, you'll feel a sharp edge on the side that should be facing your leather. And if you flip it over the other way and feel the edge, it'll feel smoother. It won't have a sharp edge. Then I place it on the rivet like so. Use the appropriate end to drive the keeper or washer onto the rivet. Will be on this side. I'll get my small brass anvil. We're going to place that right over the end of our rivet, holding it level and perpendicular to the surface. Next, I take my mallet and tap it down onto the leather until it just makes contact. And if you notice, as it made contact, it made a little tiny impression in the surface of the leather, and you should be able to see that. Also, if you notice on the rear, it's a little bit lower than flush, which means it has a little indentation. It indents just slightly into the leather where it is smooth. There is no edge sticking up. That's why I use this pointed knife, as you can use a X-Acto scalpel knife with a number 11 blade. That will work also. I just use this because it doesn't move, it doesn't bend, and I can get a more even cut that way. Now, this being a number 14 rivet, I took a pair of nice nippers and I smoothed the surface of these flush cut wire cutters for cutting heavier duty wire or nails, and I ground this nice and smooth to take up a little bit of that angle that we see here on the cutting edge, because usually there is quite a difference between this surface, the flat surface that you're cutting against, because you're going to be cutting up against that surface. If you notice here, so I have just a slight amount of bevel that is coming to the center of the cutter. That makes a nice height to cut your rivet off. Most cutters that you'll see will have a very deep, pronounced V right there on this edge. And this surface right here is the edge that will come in contact, that will hold flat to your leather. And if you notice, it has a very pronounced wedge right there, which is going to make, when we cut the rivet, will make it have a nice, it'll have a very high point, which, in my opinion, makes a lot more work out of peening your rivets, hand peening your rivets. So here we go. We're going to feel the center of our cutter on top of the keeper, or the washer if you will, and I will squeeze just slightly, turn it 90 degrees, squeeze slightly again, turn it 45 degrees, squeeze just slightly, turn it 45 degrees again, squeeze just slightly, and squeeze slightly again at 45 degrees, and again at 90, again at 45, again at 90, and I kind of just work the cut end like that. And if you notice the V that it's cut, because of how the edges ground to its sharp side, is very shallow, has a very shallow V. It doesn't have a huge long point as with a standard cutter. Now we'll do the same thing again with this cutter, and we'll just cut this piece of rivet, and now we'll turn it 90 degrees, turn it 45 degrees, turn it again at 45, and again. We're going to slowly nip this off to try to keep the burr in the center. And if you notice, that burr is a lot higher, that V is a lot more pronounced on that end than it is on the other end, which is very shallow. I don't know if you can see that or not. I hope you can. Now that we've cut the rivet off, if you'll notice, we have the rivet that is still sticking up above the retainer, or the washer, if you will. Now we take the number 2, these rivet setters from the Buckle Guy. I'd forgotten to mention, the first one has one line that machined into the handle area of your setter. That's for your first one. That's for you set your retainer or washer down onto your post of your rivet. Number 2 has 2 rings machined into it, and it has the dome shaped, with a smooth surface on the outside. Now we will take the number 2 in the size 14. We'll place it on top, centering it perpendicular on the point that we just made when we made our cut. We'll center that, and we'll take our mallet and tap it, and then you want to roll and tap all the way around in a little bit of an oscillating motion to keep it centered. Just slightly tapping. I know that probably sounds loud. Now we've got a nice smooth peen on our rivet. It's very smooth. There's no sharp edges on our peen. And if you notice really close there, you can see that it actually held on to the washer or the retainer. It actually mushroomed the part that was pointed. Now it has a nice dome shape that matches the dome inside of the number 2 setter. Now that that's done, if you want to, when we cut this and put the bevel cut on the back side of the rivet, when we pushed it through, you won't need to use the surface to cup the rear part of the rivet to keep it from catching other things like your skin. There's no way you're going to catch that. It's very smooth. It's indented into the leather just slightly, but if you wish to take it down just a little tiny bit more, you can center it right over top of that rear side of the rivet and tap one time is all it needs. There. Now it's indented just a little bit more. If you're impressed, there's an impression around the surface of the rivet just a little bit more than what it was a moment ago. Now let's go on and do a number 12 rivet, which is slightly bigger. And again, we're going to check the size of the anvil on our hole punch. It will not fit in. If you notice, it's not fitting in the hole. The next size, it just fits in the hole on the anvil, on the cutter end. And that would be, excuse me, a number 4. So we'll rotate this around to the number 4 position, which that's what it's going to do. It's going to cut a hole in the number 4 position. So we'll mark right where we want it to be. I would normally use an owl to do that, like so, to mark the center. Then I take my hole punch, center my hole punch right over top of the prick punch I used for the with the owl, and cut it. Cut the hole. Made a slightly larger hole, which just will barely fit nice and snug. Will fit the rivet snugly. Again, I use my knife and stick it in the hole and rotate just slightly. Takes off that little tiny bit right there. just like that. Slide it in the hole, give it a little push, and now it's almost flush. Bring our anvil back up. Grab the appropriate size washer, and again, you want to hold your washer or your keeper in between your index finger and your thumb and feel the edge going from the surface over the edge. Turn it over, do it again on that side. One side will always feel sharper. The sharp side, you want to place towards your leather, so that way when you're feeling the edge of it, if you happen to brush your hand across your rivet, you won't feel that sharp edge of the keeper or washer, whichever you want to call that. Now we'll take the number 1 banded setter. This sets the keeper onto the rivet. Here we go. Give it a tap. And it cuts its way down the rivet. It is lots. This keeper or washer is quite a bit smaller than the surface of the rivet itself. And if you notice, as I tap down on this retainer, you will see little shiny pieces of copper as it's shaving it as it goes down. And if you notice here on the top of the keeper, it shows area of the inside where you're placing it over the rivet, that it's mushrooming onto the rivet as you're sliding, as you're using your mallet to tap down on the washer or retaining edge. And as that keeps it in place so it doesn't move. Once you set the retainer or washer flat onto the leather, just as soon as it makes contact, one more little tap creates a slight impression in the leather and creates a slight impression back on the reverse side. Now we'll do the same thing again as we did before. Hold your cutter 90 degrees from the surface, handle 90 degrees up from the surface. Give it a small squeeze. Again. And do this at 45-degree increments if you want to keep the point straight and centered. That is the key thing when you're setting a rivet, to keep that point in the center as much as possible when you're cutting the rivet off. I always get the longer rivets than I'm going to use. These are 1-inch long rivets. There. We nipped it all the way off. Got a nice heavy bevel there. And if you notice, the point where it's cut off, where it broke free, is right in the very center of our rivet stock. Now we can see that the point of our rivet is in the center, and not as if you was to cut it off straight. Here, we'll cut one off. We'll just cut it right off. Now, if you notice, after I cut that, look where the cut is at. You can see as I rotate what that looks like. And it will not, when you're peening the rivet, it will not peen correctly. You'll have bat wings at either side. It will not look as smooth and centered as the one that has been cut so that the cutoff point or the bevel is in the center. I hope you can see that well. Okay, now back to the setting of the rivet. We take the number 2, which has the domed portion for peening the actual rivet. We're going to center that perpendicular to the surface of the leather. And we'll tap it slightly, small taps, always using a mallet. Never use a steel hammer. I roll it in a oscillating type of a motion, just slightly, as I'm tapping. And this ensures that it's going down smoothly and evenly as I'm tapping it down, and forming a nice round bevel as I'm tapping. It's not quite there. You can still feel the edges, and it feels a little bit sharp still around the edges. From every time I moved it from 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 45 degrees. We'll go back and we'll peen it some more to make sure it has a nice smooth surface. There we go. Now we have a nice smooth area. It's getting a little smoother. We got a little bit more to go on this side. I can feel a little bit of sharpness over there. There we go. Now we're smooth and flush, and it has a nice domed appearance. You can see some of the copper shavings. I brushed them away. There, it's nice and smooth, and it's indented slightly into the leather, as you can see, and on the rear, the same. It's slightly indented. There's no need to use the dome for the reverse side unless you really want to push the edges into the leather farther. There's no need to, but here, just to do it so you can see it when it's finished, give it one tap. And if you see here, there's a little bit more of an indentation in the leather and a little bit more of a depression into the leather. That's your preference. And then one thing that I don't like about that is that it creates a flat spot on the pretty domed end that you just made on this side of your rivet. Let's see if we can clean that up a little bit and flatten that dome out. Bring the dome back into it and eliminate the flat spot. We weren't able to remove it all the way. So it has like a little flat spot in the center of the rivet post that we cut off. That's my preference. I usually don't do that because I don't want that flat spot on the rivet. I like to see it when it has a nice dome that looks nice and shiny. There's really no way to remove that after that. These are a nice high quality product from the Buckle Guy. I highly will endorse how they make the product, the finished product, look. much more so than the cheap version that costs approximately $10 to $14 at the most. So we'll set one of those rivets just to see what that looks like. I have the number 9 size and a number 9 rivet. So we're going to see where we want to place the number 9 rivet. Try to give it a little bit of an eyeball to see right where you'd like to put it. Make a small impression. Check the cutting edge on your hole punch, which is number 3. We'll rotate that to number 3. And we'll place it over the center of the mark that I just made in the leather. Give it a squeeze and rotate it just slightly. Again, well, maybe with this one we will try and not cut the back side of the leather, just so you can see what it does, the difference that it makes. We'll slide the rivet through, and if you notice, the rivet sticks up quite a bit more off the surface of the leather by not beveling a cut, not beveling the hole, which is fine. It still does the same job, but we'll set the rivet and you can make your choice what you would like to see. Okay, again, we're going to check the keeper or the washer, feel the edge, feeling the edge, flip it over, feel the edge. It feels like it's got a little sharp burr on the edge. It's not smooth and rounded like the edge here. So we're going to put that sharper edge as it's going towards the leather surface. Now, we have to be careful with this setter, just because we have all of this extra surface versus this surface, which does not protrude farther than the washer itself, or the keeper, if you will. But if you notice here, this has all of this surface area. You have to be careful when setting with this setter that you don't make an indentation or an impression into your leather piece, because of, and you're working off from leverage here. And if you notice, you have a lot of wiggle room as to what can happen in your finished product. So you have to be real aware of how you're setting your keeper or washer onto the rivet post. So we're going to tap it slightly as it goes down, very slightly. If you notice, there's little specks, and that is what I was referring to when I cut the number 12 rivet. The little tiny specks of copper that flake off as you're scraping down the post of the rivet. Now we have to be careful, again, as I mentioned, that we're not going to make an impression into the leather with this excess edge that is hanging, this overhang. As you can see right here, you can see the gap, and you could actually make an impression into your leather and making your final product not look as nice. So you have to make sure your rivet is centered and is perpendicular and flat on your anvil. Give it a hit, check it. It's not quite indented into the leather very well. The rear, you can still feel it because we didn't cut that bevel out of the hole. And here we need to tap it down a little bit more, put it back into the hole side of your setter all the way down, give it another strike, and I turn it 180 degrees and strike it again. That's to keep the striking force even all the way across. It still hasn't pushed the washer or the reverse side of the rivet into the leather. It hasn't depressed it into the leather quite as much as I would like. We'll try it again. And do 180 degrees again. I only find I have to do that with this particular tool because when you're striking the end of the tool, you're not striking the end of the tool in the, it's not happening where the pressure is coming from the center like it is here. If you notice, we're off center, so when you're hitting it, you're hitting on this surface right here, and you're trying to get the pressure to come from the striking surface down through the tool and hit this area where the rivet is inside the tool, where this one is centered in the tool. This one is off center, so it makes it a little bit more difficult to tap the retainer or washer down into the leather. And again. Now it's impressed, it has the impression into the leather just slightly. I see it made a piece of this plating came off from the tool and impregnated itself into the washer. I've never had that happen before, but you can feel that it's in there. It came off, the plating came off. Because this is zinc plated, I think. Anyway, there's a lesson to be learned. I prefer not to use a cheap tool. If you can't afford the nicer tools, that's fine. You can get by with the cheaper ones. You just have to keep watching a little bit more diligently. Okay, let's cut our rivet off. We're going to start our cut again, perpendicular with our washer to our work surface and to the face of the leather. Give it a squeeze, rotate it 90 degrees, squeeze, cut 45 degrees, back at 180 degrees, now at 45 degrees again, and then at 180 degrees again. Now we're back at 45. Now we're going 45 degree increments as I rotate around the surface of the rivet. And going a little bit at a time. There. It's cut off. It's got a nice shallow bevel, which leaves a nice point right in the very center of the rivet that was just cut off. Has a nice smooth surface all the way around because we went at 45 degree cuts every single time. And if you notice, it is very much centered, which makes for a very nice looking finished product. Very sharp right in the very center. It's needle sharp. Now we take the domed end of our tool and we place the domed end on the point. Try to find the center of the dome. Hold the tool. This is where it becomes a little tricky when you're holding the tool, because there's a lot of room for error right there. You can get the tool to strike the leather on that side where you don't want it. So that's why you have to make sure to be centered, and these have to be done with slighter strikes. and rotate, rotate the tool, rotate the tool again, rotate the tool again. I like to try to rotate the tool at 45-degree increments on this particular tool. Again, and again, and again, making that. Now I'm going to rotate my project, and we're going to hit it again. Remember, going at 45-degree increments each time. I find I have to use more, exert a lot more force by using this tool. There, now we have a nice dome. It's smooth. It slightly has a slight impression into the rear side, but this particular tool does not have this real wide domed part of a tool that cups the outside edge of this rivet. There's another plus side, if that's what you'd like to have, is it being less than flush, heavily indented into the leather on this side. Now you can finish that up if you choose. I've done that before. I use a very small ball peen hammer, and at the outside edge, I'll tap it just slightly all the way around the edge. That just created that indented effect around the outside edge of the rivet. And if you notice, it has got an impression, the same as this one does. It just takes a little bit more time and a little bit more finesse. You can clean up the outside edge of your rivet to take away the flat spot. We might even be able to remove that little flat area on the top surface of the number 12 rivet on the face side. One thing about doing it this way, using the ball end of the ball peen end of your hammer, I'm using a jeweler's hammer, is you can go all the way around giving it slight little taps, which gives it almost a mosaic type of look on the surface of the rivet, which catches some light, if you notice. Try it maybe on this side. Maybe you can see that little flicker of the little flat spots all the way around the whole surface of the domed end of the rivet. Let's do it on the number 9. Let's see what we can make it look like. This is a little bit more of a look, just to kind of give it a little bit more of a rustic appeal. There. Some people like that look. I prefer the more finished, domed, shiny side. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed our tutorial today on how to set copper rivets, or how I set them anyway. There is no real right and wrong way, and my way is not the only way. That is my disclaimer. But over the course of time and years of that I've been working with leather, this seems to be the most quick way to get a good peened copper rivet. And this will work the same in a copper rivet, solid copper rivet such as these, or in a brass rivet. I use brass rivets also, but I prefer copper because I like the copper look, and we are Copper Shine Stills. We like our copper. Again, thank you very much for your time. We hope you enjoyed our tutorial. If you did, and if you found something interesting that you liked, please do give us a thumbs up, and don't hesitate to subscribe. We do appreciate that very much, as that will help us grow and help bring you some new content that you might be able to get a little bit more use out of.